Okay, I think we can go ahead and start this portion of the seminar. I appreciate all you being here today, and just finished the about half an hour video, and this is going to be the portion of the program where I'll be presenting to you information about employee rights and answering some of your questions and giving you a general overview of your rights. But before I get started with that, I thought I'd give you a little bit of history, just a few tidbits here. This is a very old book. I got it, a friend of mine went to England one time and picked this thing up. It's a very smelly book, very musty. It's about, I think, 1717, it's dated, very, very old. So I thought I'd give you a little background here. And it says, in fact, I'm going to put this on the board here. It tells about a statute, a law that they had way back in England, even in the 1700s, that might apply to some of your situations. It said, quoting from this book, "And no person," they put F's like S's back in those days, "which shall retain any person shall put away his said servant, and no person retained according to this statute shall depart before the end of his term, unless it be for some reasonable cause to be allowed before one justice or mayor, to whom the party grieved shall complain, and no master shall put away any such servant at the end of his term, nor shall any such servant depart at the end of his term without 1 quarter's warning, on pain hereafter ensuing." So here we have a statute, even way back then, about wrongful termination law, about severance pay, and so on. And another bit of background, which I'd like to explain to you before I really get started, would be going back even further in time. If you look back in the Middle Ages, or even back into the BC era, even in the Bible, Adam and Eve, they have a problem with Cain and Abel. That was almost a workplace issue. One was tilling the field and slew the other, and you had workplace employee-employee relationships throughout the Bible. They had slavery happening, people controlling each other. Eventually, the history of the world is related to employment and labor, people controlling other people in city-states, and city-states becoming nations. And in the Middle Ages, we have laws, especially in England, that gave workers more rights. Then in the 1800s, we even had even more laws. Here's different types of workers being taken advantage of by the employer, that eventually was resolved through the late 1800s to, here's another one, people on a strike, boys trying to ask for some decent workplace conditions, to finally have many, many statutes in late 1800s, 1900s that give us the rights we have today. Now, the good news is that there has never been in the history of the world more rights for in the workplace than there are right now. So you should consider pleased that you do have a lot of rights if you just understand them. Now, that's a brief overview of the world history on labor law and employment law. We're going to get a little bit more specific here in a second. But a quick background on our firm here. As you know, that our firm just does employment law. We're probably the largest, or one of the largest law firms in the state that just specialize in that type of law. So we have a wide variety of clients. Now, some of you might be employees coming here because of an employee issue. Some of you might be management, or coming from the employer's point of view. And so there's a wide variety of issues here. What I would like to do is find out what you are mostly interested in employment law, and then I'll make sure I can address that. I'm going to be doing a lot of things in general, but I'll make sure I'm real specific on your particular area. Anybody want to volunteer one employment law topic that you are particularly interested in?
Wrongful termination.
Okay, wrongful termination in general. Okay.
Small businesses who don't have HR departments.
Okay, no HR department. Okay. It's, sometimes they don't quite know what they're doing, and
They make up the rules as they go.
they make up the rules and sometimes make big mistakes. Anybody else?
Medical leave, workers' comp.
Okay, medical leave, workers' comp. What I'm going to do now is to give you a little bit of overview. Okay, so we've got wrongful termination, we've got medical leave, and then small businesses. And make sure I hit each one of those. Any other issues I should be covering that you're particularly interested in? Yes?
What about disability, being terminated for a disability?
disability, and a big one is discrimination. A lot of people are subjected to discrimination, and that's one of the main areas of law in the country and also in our state as well. So I'll try to cover each one of those and expand upon it. You can have the opportunity to ask some questions as we go along, or even after it's over, get a little bit more specific and get into your exact question or area. But now let me just go on to one other, as a preface to this. A lot of people think that when you're fired, and a lot of you may have been terminated, and you're here because of that. Usually we get a lot of people who have been terminated. They want to know what their rights are and what they can do. Other people haven't been fired yet. They just want to know what can they do in the workplace. They've got this demotion coming down they're real concerned about, or they think that they are not going to get the promotion, or their boss has given them a bad review, and they want to know what can they do about it. Can they, should they argue? What's the psychology involved with employer-employee? So there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but one thing is a lot of people are usually discouraged when they get fired, right? And some of you may have been terminated. It gets a little bit discouraging. That's not always the case, and it depends upon your attitude. Now, when you get done with this, you might feel that there might be some advantages to being fired. Like this gentleman said, stop worrying about doing a good job. The big money is in severance pay. So that is often the case. Sometimes it ends up you get a lot of money in severance pay, and more often than not, I find people who have left one employment and started another one, their next job is better than the last one, or gives them things that their last one doesn't give them, or more opportunities. So even though it's a little bit discouraging in the beginning, eventually, a lot of times it works out. Okay, so one of the biggest points on when you're terminated, which we're going to be talking about wrongful termination in the beginning, then we're going to talk about some other issues like we put on the board here, is why were you fired? What's the real reason you were fired or demoted or treated unfairly or something like that? So what the real key is, and a question that we often get in the Los Angeles Times, as you might know, I've written for the Los Angeles Times for about 7 years in their Sunday business section, and this is one of the questions that they get all the time. This question is titled, "Reason Behind the Reason for Firing Important." This particular person said that they went to their executive secretary, CEO, and she got fired, and she's not quite sure why she got fired. And my argument here is that you've got to figure out, regardless of what the employer is telling you, you've got to find out what's the real reason behind their motivation. And so they might say, oh, we laid you off, or you were late today, or this or that. That may not be the real reason. The real reason may be because that employer doesn't like women, or the employer doesn't like your particular brand of religion, or whatever the point might be. So the point I'm making here is you've got to, even if you're an at-will employee, where you think they can fire you at will for any reason at any time, that's not necessarily the case, and often you can get around that. You might be an employee where you deserve to have a good reason for the firing. If they don't have a good reason, or a legal reason, then they can't fire you. So even if you are an at-will employee, if it's an illegal reason, that's improper. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm an at-will employee, they can fire me at will for any reason. That's not true. Any reason but an illegal one. So what's an illegal reason? We're going to find that out in a second here. Okay. So the first topic is wrongful termination. Wrongful termination, and the general rule is that everybody is an at-will employee. That we all are. It says it by statute in our code in California, and many other states have that same law. That you're presumed to be an at-will employee. And that means the employer can say, I don't like your shoelaces, and you are fired. There's the door. They can do that. That's totally legal. It doesn't sound very nice, does it? But there's some very important exceptions to the rule. And those exceptions are that you have to have good cause on these exceptions. So that the fight is between at-will employment, where they can do anything, and they have to have a good reason. That's essentially the conflict here. And so the three exceptions where you have to have good cause is discrimination, retaliation, and employment contract. So we're going to get into those one by one right now and try to analyze whether you fall within those exceptions and what they all mean. Now the first one is on discrimination. A lot of people have different concepts of discrimination, and especially management does, as to what is this. This particular business here had their own attitude, as you can tell. It says, this one, there's no sex discrimination here because we fired all the men. They think they can get away with it that way, but it doesn't quite work that way. So, what is discrimination? Discrimination has certain, it doesn't count discrimination because you're wearing a blue shirt. Does the law protect you if you wear a blue shirt? No. It's got to be certain areas, age, gender, race, etc. Certain areas that the law says we are going to protect people in those areas, and if they fire you, even if you're an at-will employee, and you're in those areas, and if it's because of one of these areas, you have rights to not be fired. Now, it's not good enough to say that you are over the age of 40, or you're a woman, or you're Chinese, or you're a certain religion. It's not good enough. You've got to show that you're in a certain protected category, and that you have as good or better performance than your replacement or your peers. It doesn't count if you're the worst performer there, and you're a man, and everybody else is women, they fired you, and you think it's because you're a man. It doesn't count. If you're the worst performer there, tough luck. You deserve to be fired. So you've got to show that you're at least better or good as anybody else. The next one, you've got to show the discharge or your demotion or the failure to promote you, no promotion, is what's happening here. I mean, you've got to show that some act is happening, and then you've got to show your replacement or your peer is not a member of your group. For example, if you're 60 years old and they fire you, you'd say, oh, that's age discrimination. Well, that doesn't count if your replacement is also 60. It doesn't look like it's age discrimination if your replacement is in the same category. So you've got to prove these areas. Then you can prove that that discrimination happened. Now, these are a longer list of all the different protected groups. Now, any one of these things counts, and the law protects you if you're in those groups. If that really is the reason that they're terminating you, or not promoting you, or whatever. When you compare yourself with your peers, that's important. Now, it's just, there's a lot of areas in which you should compare yourself. Now, the main area, of course, is performance. You've got to show that your performance is as good or better than everybody else. Assurances, you need to look at what assurances do they give you, and the standards they subject you to. What is your tenure? If you've been there 30 years, somebody else has been there 2 years, and they let you go, I mean, the tenure counts for something. And usually, if you have longer tenure and you're as good or better than the next person, then they should give you a little bit of preference. Discrimination category, retaliation category. What type of discrimination they're doing against you? What type of retaliation? Other types of differences between you and the other. So whenever I get a client in and they alleges discrimination, I want to go down the checklist and figure out, okay, now, what type of discrimination is it? How do you compare with everybody else there? And the better comparison, if you say you've had great performance reviews and they just gave you a good performance review last week, but you have a new manager over you, and that new manager has made it clear that they just don't like people of your religious background, and then you're gone the next week. And that looks pretty fishy to me. And so you just have to analyze all these different things and see if there's discrimination, and go from there.